Hook. What if one forgotten American engineer, unknown to most history books, once held in his hands the power to plunge the world into darkness, derail the arc of modern civilization, and spark a global catastrophe decades before anyone had heard the word Cold War? What if, buried in the archives of Washington, D.C., in boxes labeled Declassified 1987, lies the story of how a single man's obsession, brilliance, and betrayal shaped the hidden fault lines of the 20th century? And what if this story is true? Part 1. The Man Who Saw Too Far. Chapter 1. The Lost Blueprint. The blueprint looked innocent enough. A single sheet of thick, cream-colored engineering paper, folded into a neat square and bound with a small red ribbon, as if it were a birthday gift, rather than a destabilizing piece of science. On that autumn afternoon in 1935, while the rest of Washington bustled with the noise of a nation climbing out of the Great Depression, Thomas Huxley Tarter, age 31, opened the small wooden crate delivered to his desk at the U.S. Patent Office. The cover letter was handwritten, shaky, and unsigned. To the Government of the United States, I have made something dangerous. Please keep it safe. Carter unfolded the blueprint. What he saw didn't make sense. A machine diagram, large, circular, with electromagnetic coils, vacuum tubes, and something resembling a turbine, yet it wasn't unlike any generator he had ever examined. It wasn't meant to create power. It was meant to tear something open. At the bottom was a title, written with an almost obsessive precision: The Carver-Morozov Oscillation Engine, a theoretical method for inducing controlled vacuum instability. Carter frowned. He had never heard of Morozov. He had also never encountered any engineer insane enough to propose artificially creating a vacuum instability, a microscopic tear in space-time, something only theoretical physicists in Europe whispered about at conferences. But what chilled him wasn't the theory. It was the mathematical accuracy. Someone out there had done the calculations. Someone out there had taken a dangerous idea and turned it into a design that could, if built, potentially unleash forces even scientists at Princeton or Berlin had not fully considered. Carter understood one thing immediately. This blueprint needed to disappear. Chapter 2. The Shadow Bureau. 2 weeks later, Carter sat in a smoky, windowless office in the basement of the old State, War, and Navy building. 3 men stood around him, none in uniform, none wearing any identifying insignia. The one in the middle, a narrow-faced man with thin spectacles, introduced himself as Mr. Alden, no first name. "We handle," Alden said softly, tapping the blueprint, "materials that fall outside the jurisdiction of normal government bodies." Carter swallowed. Meaning what exactly? Alden didn't blink. Meaning anything that could alter the balance of the world if it were built. The room fell silent. On the table lay the oscillation engine blueprint, now placed neatly atop a brown envelope stamped Confidential, Strategic Anomaly Office. Carter raised an eyebrow. "This office isn't real. I work in the patent office. I would know." Alden leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, some government agencies don't exist until the moment they need to." Carter didn't know it then, but he had just become the newest member of one of the most secret organizations in American history, one so obscure that even most U.S. presidents would never learn its name. Chapter 3. The Immigrant Genius. The mysterious co-author of the blueprint, the one whose name was signed in the lower right corner, Morozov, turned out to be a Russian émigré physicist, Dr. Alexander Mikhailovich Morozov, born in St. Petersburg, expelled from the Soviet Union in 1929 for unorthodox behavior and ideological contamination. Translation: he had gotten too smart. Morozov lived alone in a tiny apartment above a bakery in Chicago. When Carter knocked on his door on a snowy night in December 1935, the man who answered was a ghost, thin, pale, eyes sunken from years of sleepless obsession. "You came," he whispered. "I expected the government eventually." "We just want to understand," Carter said. Morozov smiled sadly. "No one wants to understand. They want to control." Morozov invited him in. His walls were covered in chalkboard equations, hundreds of them, tensor calculus, vacuum metrics, cosmological constants that no normal engineer would know how to use. "You invented a device that could tear a hole in empty space," Carter said quietly. "Why?" Morozov sat at his table, hands shaking slightly. "Because I saw a way into the future, and the future is collapsing." Carter didn't understand. Not yet, but he was about to. Chapter 4. The First Demonstration. Morozov insisted on showing him a small prototype, harmless scale, but enough to prove, enough to terrify. The device sat on a wooden workbench, half the size of a suitcase, a ring of metal coils, a humming transformer, glass tubes flickering with bluish light. He flipped a switch. The hum deepened. A strange vibration filled the room, as if the air itself were trembling. The light dimmed. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. At the exact center of the coils, space seemed to ripple. Not visually, not physically, emotionally. A sensation like pressure, dread, inevitability. Instinctively, Carter stepped back. Morozov shut it off immediately. "You see," he whispered, "a whisper of the void, a reminder that our world is not the only stable configuration of energy. Push hard enough, and even reality folds." Carter sat down, shaking. This was no longer theoretical. It was real. And the U.S. government now had possession of the only known blueprint capable of doing it on a large scale. Chapter 5. Storm Clouds Over Europe. The year 1936 arrived, and with it the rising thunder of global tension. Hitler reoccupied the Rhineland. Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. Japan marched deeper into China. The world, unknowingly, was rushing toward catastrophe. But hidden beneath all this, a quieter, stranger race had begun. A race not for territory, or oil, or colonies. A race for control of the fundamental structure of space itself. British intelligence intercepted fragments of German scientific correspondence referring to something called Projekt Höhlenspalt, Hell Fissure. Soviet spies reported a secret physics laboratory outside Moscow working on high-energy quantum disruption. And in Washington, deep underground, the Strategic Anomaly Office began its most ambitious mission yet: to build a team capable of understanding and neutralizing the Carter-Morozov engine before any enemy could assemble one. But there was one problem. The engine's co-author, Morozov, disappeared, without a trace. Chapter 6. Vanished. Early spring 1936. Carter arrived at Morozov's Chicago apartment to gather his notes, only to find the door splintered, chalkboards shattered, equations half erased, papers scattered like leaves. A single phrase had been carved into the wall with something sharp. They came too early. I was not ready. Morozov was gone. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just gone. A neighbor claimed to have heard strange metallic humming the night before, similar to the oscillation prototype, a humming like reality shifting. Carter felt cold. Did Morozov turn the device on again? Did someone force him to? Or did someone, some government, some shadow group take him? The Strategic Anomaly Office suspected the Soviets immediately. The NKVD had a long reach, and Morozov was technically a traitor to the Soviet regime. But Carter found something the others missed: a small scrap of paper wedged beneath the radiator. On it, in Morozov's handwriting, "The world is vibrating wrong. I hear it in the walls." Carter stared at it for a long time. This wasn't espionage. It was something far stranger, something that terrified even Morozov. Chapter 7. The President's Secret Meeting, 1937. By 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had been briefed, not fully, but enough to understand the stakes. In a meeting witnessed only by 4 people, he was shown the oscillation prototype. He felt the same pressure, the same existential dread, and he understood what the Strategic Anomaly Office already knew. If anyone built the full-scale version, it could destabilize matter on a catastrophic level. Roosevelt gave a simple order. "Then we must be the only nation alive that knows how to stop it." A task force was formed: physicists, engineers, mathematicians, intelligence officers. Carter, to his disbelief, was put in charge. At 33, he had become one of the most important and least known figures in American history. But the story was about to leave American soil entirely, because Morozov wasn't dead. He was hiding. And the world powers, Germany, the USSR, Japan, and Britain, were all hunting him for the same reason. Whoever controlled Morozov controlled the future of space-time manipulation. And wherever Morozov had run, he had taken the missing half of the blueprint with him. Part 2. The Man Hunted by Nations. Chapter 8. The Ciphered Letter, 1937. 3 months after Morozov vanished, Carter received a letter. No return address, no postage marks. It had been hand-delivered to the Strategic Anomaly Office by someone none of the guards remembered seeing. Inside was a single page written in a tight, frantic script. Thomas, they are not who you think. The threat is not political, it is structural. You must find the places where reality thins. They follow the vibrations. A. M. Morozov. Carter read the message 10 times. The handwriting was unmistakably Morozov's. But the message? Reality thins? Vibrations? Before Carter could fully process it, he noticed something else. There was a faint watermark behind the text, a symbol, a spiral. Not a perfect circle, slightly deformed, as if twisted by an unseen force. He had seen it before. On the oscillation engine blueprint. In the upper right corner, drawn faintly in pencil. Morozov never explained the symbol, and now it seemed to be a signature of some kind. His way of saying, "This letter is real, and I am terrified." Chapter 9. The Race Begins. The U.S. wasn't the only country searching. By late 1937, German agents under Reinhard Heydrich had formed a special unit within the SD focused on non-conventional physics assets. Soviet NKVD operatives were scouring immigrant communities across Europe and North America. The British SIS had quietly put Alan Turing himself on deciphering any anomalous physics reports. Japanese intelligence sent teams across Manchuria to locate rumors of a wandering Russian physicist, all hunting the same man. Morozov had become the most valuable human being on Earth, and he was alone. A single defecting scientist who held in his head the missing equations, the corrections to the blueprint, and knowledge of how to stabilize or destabilize vacuum boundaries. The Axis wanted him to win the coming war. The Soviets wanted him as a trophy and a lever. The British wanted to preempt German success. The Americans wanted him safe. And Morozov? He didn't want anyone. He wanted to run from something none of the powers understood. Not yet. Chapter 10. The Man in the Polaroid. In early 1938, the first breakthrough came from a source no one expected. A fisherman in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He reported seeing a thin, ghost-like man speaking Russian-accented English boarding a freight ship bound for Reykjavik. Suspicious, Canadian intelligence forwarded the message to Washington. The Strategic Anomaly Office responded by sending Agent Lewis Grant, a former naval officer turned intelligence operative, to investigate. Grant arrived in Halifax with a briefcase containing Carter's notes, a copy of Morozov's handwriting, the blueprint's spiral symbol, and a portable camera. What he found was more than anyone expected. A dock worker had taken a Polaroid photograph of the strange Russian man. Grant held the photo under the cold morning light. The man in the picture was unmistakably Morozov, thin, shaking, eyes hollow with fear. But something else was wrong. Behind Morozov, in the blurred background of the photograph, was a strange distortion, like heat haze, but in freezing weather. A ripple, a faint warping of the wooden crates behind him. Grant showed the photo to Carter. Carter's stomach tightened. It's the same effect as the oscillation engine. Morozov wasn't just running. He was bringing something with him, or something was following. Chapter 11. Reykjavik, the Silent City, 1938. Grant traveled to Iceland in pursuit. Reykjavik was small then, quiet streets, cold winds from the Atlantic, fishermen mending nets in the early mornings. But beneath the calm surface, the city hid secrets. A harbor official remembered Morozov arriving. He kept asking about vibrations, he said uneasily, like earthquakes, except in the air. Morozov had rented a small room near the edge of the city. Grant searched it. Inside, he found a half-burned notebook, sketches of the oscillation engine, circles, spirals, drawn repeatedly, obsessively, and a torn page with a single phrase, "It followed me here." Grant sent everything back to Washington. But on the third night, something happened that changed the mission entirely. At 2:14 a.m., Grant was awakened by a deep vibration, not from the ground, but from the air, as if the entire atmosphere hummed for a moment. Then came a sharp crack and silence. Grant threw on his coat and ran outside. What he saw, he would later describe as a patch of darkness that moved. Not a shadow, not a person, a moving darkness, like the absence of light was alive. It lasted only seconds before dissolving into the night wind. Grant left Iceland the next morning. He wasn't sure what he had witnessed, but Carter knew exactly what it meant. Someone, something, had activated a piece of Morozov's technology, and Morozov was no longer alone. Chapter 12. The Spiral Appears Again. When Grant returned, Carter examined the burned notebook page. He recognized the numbers. They weren't calculations. They were coordinates. Remote, uninhabited, in the Arctic Circle. Morozov wasn't hiding among people. He was hiding in places where the world was thin, as he had written in his letter. Carter presented the findings to the Strategic Anomaly Office leadership. They debated whether to pursue. But then came a second message. A weather station in northern Greenland reported seeing lights, pulsing, unnatural circular lights emanating from an abandoned whaling post. The base commander recorded in his log. It was like the aurora borealis, if the aurora were trying to drill a hole in the sky. The spiral symbol was found burned into the ice. Morozov had been there, and whatever followed him had arrived. Part 3. Into the Arctic Shadow. Chapter 13. The Greenland Report, 1938. The message arrived in Washington as a simple radiogram from the U.S. Coast Guard cutter North Star, patrolling icy waters near Greenland. But the contents were anything but simple. Unexplained electromagnetic pulses recorded. Faint circular lights above abandoned whaling post. Spiral symbol cut into ice. No persons present. Recommend immediate investigation. The radio man who transmitted it later filed an addendum. Lights pulsed in rhythm resembling a heartbeat. Carter read the report 3 times. A heartbeat? A device like the oscillation engine had no such rhythm. It hummed, buzzed, destabilized, but it did not pulse like something alive. Unless Morozov had modified the design, or something else was interacting with it. The Strategic Anomaly Office convened an emergency session, and by midnight, Carter had been ordered to assemble the most secret expedition in U.S. history. Destination, the Arctic Circle. Objective, find Morozov, or what was left of him. Chapter 14. Operation Frostline. The expedition team had 12 members. Carter, Chief Engineer. Agent Grant, Field Intelligence. Dr. Evelyn Ross, Physicist from MIT. Commander Daniel Pierce, U.S. Navy. 8 hand-picked specialists in communications, survival, and equipment handling. Their cover story, a geophysical survey mission. Their real mission, prevent a space-time catastrophe before anyone else reached Morozov. Germany had already dispatched a U-boat. The Soviets were rumored to have sent a team via Murmansk. British whispers suggested MI6 was monitoring American activity. And somewhere out there, Morozov was activating something too powerful to remain hidden. Chapter 15. The Whaling Post. The abandoned whaling station on Greenland's northern coast looked like a skeleton. Broken timbers, rusted chains, and snow drifting through buildings long since emptied. But something was wrong from the moment the team arrived. There were no footprints, no tracks, no signs anyone had been there for months, except the spiral carved into the ice. Perfect, smooth, precise down to a fraction of a millimeter. Carter knelt beside it. His gloved hand traced the edges. It wasn't carved, he whispered. It was melted. Dr. Ross scraped a thin layer of surface ice and held it up to the light. It's vitrified, she said. Meaning what? Grant asked. It's been heated so quickly and intensely that the ice turned into glass. Carter felt a chill unrelated to the wind. Only one thing could do that. the oscillation engine, or a more refined version of it. Chapter 16. The Chamber Below. Inside the largest shack, beneath a collapsed floorboard, the team discovered a narrow staircase leading underground, far deeper than any whaling station needed. Morozov had built something here. The air grew warmer as they descended, not pleasant warmth, unnatural warmth, like the temperature didn't belong to the environment surrounding it. At the bottom was a small chamber, empty, except for a single table. On it lay a stack of papers, a small metal device blinking faintly, and a journal labeled A.M. Morozov. Carter opened the journal. The first page was simple. I have finally confirmed it. It is not political forces hunting me. They are structural forces. The next pages were worse. Drawings of ripples in space-time, annotations describing thin spots where the vacuum was weaker, equations showing energy not leaking out but leaking in, as if something beyond the known universe was trying to push through. Grant lifted the metal object on the table. "What's this?" Dr. Ross examined it. "A harmonic resonator," she said. "He built a detector, a way to sense when the fabric of space is destabilizing." The resonator blinked faster. "Beep, beep, 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 beep." "Something's active," Dr. Ross said quietly. "Right now." At the back of the chamber, Carter found a second journal page tacked to the wall. A message. "To whoever finds this, the engine was not meant to open anything. It was meant to measure the strain before the tear comes. Do not let them build it. Do not let them believe they control it. The tear is forming on its own. Something is coming through." The team exchanged uneasy glances. Grant swallowed hard. Coming through from where? The answer lay in the next sentence. From the other side of the vacuum boundary. Carter closed his eyes. Morozov hadn't invented a weapon. He had stumbled onto a natural phenomenon, a phenomenon now accelerating. But the final line was worse. "I am leaving. The next thin point is in neutral territory, a place of magnetic stillness, Svalbard. If I don't reach it first, we will all feel the consequences." Pierce exhaled slowly. "Svalbard is crawling with German intelligence right now, and the Soviets want coal rights there." Carter looked up from the journal. "Then we're all too late." The resonator began screaming, not beeping, screaming, a rising shrill tone like metal being torn in half. The ice under their feet vibrated. The lights flickered. A low, otherworldly hum filled the chamber. Dr. Ross looked at Carter, face pale. "It's starting." Chapter 17. The First Event. The chamber lights went dark. Only the resonator glowed, pulsing, flickering, then turning a deep, impossible violet. The air thickened. Sound changed, muffled as if the atmosphere itself had become heavy. Then the walls bent. Not physically, visually. Reality itself wavered. A circular distortion formed in the center of the chamber. Not a portal, not a hole. Something more horrifying, a region where light behaved incorrectly. Colors inverted. Shadows pointed in the wrong direction. A smell of burnt ozone and cold metal filled the room. Grant stumbled backward, gasping. What is that?" Dr. Ross whispered, voice trembling. "A vacuum instability. A micro-tear." Carter stared, transfixed with terror. Morozov's warning echoed in his mind. The tear is natural. It will come whether we build the engine or not. The distortion pulsed outward. The chamber shook. The metal table bent inward as if pulled by invisible hands. And then, silence. The tear collapsed. The room snapped back to normal. The resonator flickered, then died. Grant wiped sweat from his forehead. If that was a small one, what does a big one look like? Carter didn't answer. He knew the truth. The Svalbard location wasn't a meeting point. It was the next place the universe would rupture, and Morozov was running straight toward it.
Part 4. Svalbard, the Thin Point. Chapter 19. The Ship with No Flag, 1938. The expedition left Greenland under a sky the color of hammered steel. They sailed aboard the USS Havisham, a small Coast Guard vessel refitted for intelligence operations. But halfway to Svalbard, something strange happened. On the second night at sea, Pierce spotted a ship on the horizon. No flag, no lights, no identification markers. Just a black silhouette cutting through the Arctic waters like a knife. Grant raised his binoculars. Only one nation sails unmarked vessels in these waters. The Germans, Pierce said. But Carter shook his head. That's not a Kriegsmarine design. Look at the rear deck. That's Soviet. Dr. Ross leaned closer. But the bow, that looks almost British. None of them said what they were all thinking. Someone had built a ship from mismatched parts. A covert vessel designed to pass for anything and nothing. The ship didn't approach, didn't broadcast signals, didn't alter course. It simply watched them for hours, until, without warning, it vanished into a wall of fog, as if it had never been there at all. Pierce tightened his jaw. 3 nations chasing Morozov, but what if there's a 4th? No one replied, because the truth felt too large to say aloud. Chapter 20. The Dead Station at Longyearbyen. Svalbard's largest settlement, Longyearbyen, was already unusual, remote, cold, and governed by an international treaty allowing citizens of dozens of countries to live and work there. A perfect place for covert operations. But when the Havisham anchored offshore, the town was silent. No voices, no lights, no smoke from chimneys, no dogs barking. Just the wind howling across snowdrifts. The streets were empty. Grant whispered, "This doesn't feel abandoned. It feels evacuated." Carter checked his instruments. No electromagnetic anomalies. Dr. Ross frowned. "Which is impossible. If Morozov came through here, the resonator should be reacting." Pierce split the team and moved in tactical formation toward the mining outpost. Inside the station building, they found signs of a rapid flight. Coffee mugs left on tables, a typewriter with a half-finished letter, chairs overturned, a parka dropped in the doorway. Grant found the letter still in the typewriter. It read, "The sky is pulsing again. Lights, circular. Something is..." The line ended mid-sentence. Pierce looked out the frosted window. Something scared an entire town into running without taking anything. Dr. Ross noticed a faint glow outside, a soft violet light, coming from the hills. She whispered, "The next thin point," and Morozov was somewhere inside it. Chapter 21. The Violet Hills. The team trudged through knee-deep snow toward the glowing ridge, wind screaming, ice cracking beneath their boots. Every step felt heavier. The glow wasn't natural. It pulsed slowly, like a living organism. Purple, then faint blue, then purple again. As they climbed the ridge, the distortion grew clearer. Not light, not electricity. It was a region where reality itself shimmered, like heat distortions over asphalt, but in freezing Arctic air. The resonator Carter carried in his pack activated on its own, a single droning tone, steady, terrifying. When they reached the top, Pierce raised a hand. "Contact," he whispered. Below them, in the valley, was a camp. Canvas tents, 3 vehicles, a field transmitter, and a dozen men wearing German uniforms. The Abwehr, German military intelligence. And in the center of the camp, tied to a wooden frame, half-conscious and shivering, was Alexander Morozov. Carter's chest tightened. He was alive, but barely. Grant exhaled. "We need to extract him now." "No," Dr. Ross whispered, pointing. Above the German camp in the sky was a distortion so large it dwarfed the entire valley. A circular ripple, pulsing, vibrating the air, growing. A vacuum instability on a scale none of them had seen. Morozov's final warning echoed through Carter's head. The tear is forming on its own. The Germans didn't understand the danger, or worse, they were trying to use it. Chapter 22. The German Gamble. Carter, Grant, and Pierce moved closer, crouching behind a ridge of ice. They overheard German conversations. "Wir müssen Feld stabilisieren. Morozov verweigert die letzte Gleichung zu geben. Die Maschine reagiert nicht. Berlin verlangt Ergebnisse." Dr. Ross's face went pale. They brought their own prototype. Carter peered downward. In the center of the German camp sat a metallic device the size of a car engine, a ring of steel, copper coils, power cables running into portable generators. A crude oscillation engine. "It's incomplete," Carter whispered. "They're missing the counterbalancing metrics Morozov calculated." "If they activate it, they'll make the tear worse," Dr. Ross said. Grant cursed under his breath. How do we get Morozov out without starting a war? But the decision was made for them, because at that moment, a German officer shouted, "Energiezufuhr aktivieren! Energize the power!" Generators roared. The coils around the device began to glow. The air shook. The sky ripple responded, growing larger, faster, darker. Morozov screamed, "No, no, you fools! You'll tear it open!" But no one listened. And then, a gunshot. One of the German technicians collapsed, blood spraying across the snow. Another shot. Chaos erupted. Pierce swore, "Who's firing? We didn't—" "No," Carter said, eyes widening. "It's not us." From behind the Germans, figures emerged from the shadows. Dark coats, fur hats, submachine guns. The NKVD. The Soviets had arrived, and they wanted Morozov at any cost. Chapter 23. The 3 Flags in the Snow. Gunfire lit up the valley. Germans dove for cover. Soviets advanced relentlessly. Bullets cracked across the icy air. But the instability continued to grow. The sky ripple twisted violently, expanding into an oval shape. The air around it vibrated like the surface of a drum. Dr. Ross shouted over the gunfire, "The feedback loop is accelerating. If it reaches critical amplitude—" Carter finished, "It will tear." And no one knew what lay on the other side. Grant grabbed his rifle. "I can get us a 20-second window to reach Morozov." Pierce nodded. "Make it 30. But before they could move, Morozov, still tied to the frame, lifted his head and screamed, "Stop the machine, or the sky will break!" A Soviet commander turned toward the oscillation engine, realizing the danger too late. The machine's coils were now glowing white-hot. Snow melted in a perfect circle around it. And then a deafening crack split the air. A second ripple formed inside the first. Dr. Ross gasped, "A harmonic resonance! The tear is doubling!" Carter felt his stomach drop. It wasn't just a tear. It was a doorway.
Chapter 24. The Thing Behind the Boundary. The air grew impossibly cold. Frost formed on their eyelashes. Sound dampened until everything felt distant, unreal. And then everyone, Americans, Germans, Soviets, froze. Because something moved inside the tear. A silhouette. Not human, not animal, not describable. A shape that made the mind recoil. A geometry that shouldn't exist. A presence that felt heavy, oppressive, ancient. Grant whispered, voice trembling. What is that?" Dr. Ross shook her head slowly. "There's no term for it in physics." Morozov screamed hysterically. "It's not alive! It's the absence of life! Shut it down! Shut it down!" But the machine kept feeding the instability. The tear widened. The figure inside shifted closer. Grant chambered around. "Carter, what do we do?" Carter knew the answer. "We stop that machine." Pierce nodded. "And how exactly do we do that?" Carter looked at the German camp's power generator. "We blow it up." Continue, Part 6. The Calculations of Survival. The Antarctic sun, low and slanted, painted the ice in sheets of silver as Shackleton crouched over a scrap of canvas on which Worsley had sketched rough bearings. The wind snapped at the edges like a hungry dog. Worsley's pencil dragged across the fabric, its movements jittering from cold-numbed fingers. "From here," Worsley muttered, squinting at the horizon where the last sliver of endurance had vanished beneath pressure ridges, "we drift northwest. The pack is carrying us at best estimate 2 miles a day." "How long?" Shackleton asked. "Too long," Worsley swallowed. Shackleton said nothing. Too long meant starvation. Too long meant exposure. Too long meant men dying one by one, quietly, as men do when hope drains quicker than blood. Frank Wilde approached, snow caking his beard. "Boss," he said, "the men are asking what next." Shackleton stood. He said, "The next thing is simple. We live." Wilde cracked a grin. "Aye, I'll tell them that." But the truth behind Shackleton's eyes was heavier than any drifting berg. The dogs began to weaken. By mid-November, the pack dogs, tough, snarling beasts bred for sledge work, began to fade. Their paws cracked, their ribs showed like bone scaffolding. Even Shackleton, who adored the animals, could no longer deny the truth. They were consuming more calories than they could contribute. One grim morning, the men gathered in a circle, their breath rising like funeral smoke. A shot echoed, brief, final. A second shot followed, then a third. McIlroy, the surgeon, turned away. Ord Leese wiped his glasses with a shaking hand. Greenstreet stood ramrod straight, jaw clenched so hard it looked like carved from ice. Shackleton didn't watch. He simply said, "We will use everything. Nothing is to be wasted." The meat was divided. The strongest portions were saved for the dogs still capable of pulling sledges. The rest was rationed into small, greasy portions that warmed in the men's hands before warming their bellies.
No one thanked the animals out loud, but every man felt it. A crack in the flow. On December 20th, with the men finally adjusting to the rhythm of the flow, hunt, cook, sleep, repair gear, a deafening roar split the night. The ice cracked beneath the camp like the snapping spine of a colossal beast. "Up! Everyone up!" Green shouted, leaping from his sleeping bag. The men scrambled out of their tents as the entire camp jolted. Boxes toppled, cookware clattered, the ice beneath them trembled like the deck of a sinking ship. "Move!" Shackleton barked. "Spread out! Ropes ready!" A black, open seam of water surged through the middle of the camp, widening by the second. Crean dragged supplies backward. Wild slashed tent canvas free. Hurley, ever fearless, sprinted directly toward his tripod, grabbing his camera as the flow quivered under him. "Leave the plates!" Shackleton shouted. Hurley ignored him. He reached his metal canisters of glass negatives, snatched 12, the best of his life's work, and hurled the rest into the sea. 50 priceless photographs vanished with a hiss. "That's all," Hurley said, breathing hard. "Good man," Shackleton nodded. Behind them, another crack screamed open, splitting the world into islands of white drifting on black Arctic water. The men jumped from floe to floe, hauling the lifeboats with ropes until the cracks stopped multiplying and the night grew still again. By dawn, the landscape looked different, broken, rearranged, hostile. "That," Crean muttered, "was the continent reminding us we don't belong here." Christmas on the ice. They celebrated anyway. A piece of reindeer meat saved for months was shared like a treasure. Green baked a mock Christmas pudding using flour scraps, sugar, and a single raisin cut into 28 pieces. The men sang, they joked, they toasted, iron mugs clacking, to mothers, to future wives, to imaginary firesides with imaginary warmth. And Shackleton watched them, memorizing each face. Men could endure almost anything for a little while longer if someone kept their spirits alive. This was his real job, not leading, not navigating, not planning. Keeping hope burning like a candle cupped in two hands against the wind. He leaned toward Worsley and whispered, "In 20 days, Shackleton whispered, "we march." Worsley nodded without question. There was no alternative. The march that failed. January 1916 arrived with cruelty. The ice softened. The sledges sank. Men hauled and dragged and staggered across shifting, grinding floe fields that behaved more like slush than solid ground. After 3 days, they had covered a single mile. A single mile. Shackleton made the hardest decision of the expedition. "We stop," he declared. "We make camp again. We drift." No man argued. None needed to. Their bodies were already beyond argument. That night, Shackleton wrote in his diary, "I must think for all. The responsibility is wearing, but I cannot, must not fail them." Ocean Camp to Patience Camp. For weeks, the ice carried them like unwilling passengers. They shot seals when lucky. They tightened their belts nearly to discomfort. They slept in damp bags, their breath freezing into frost on the canvas overhead. Then the floe split again. They moved. Then the floe split again. They moved. At last, Shackleton named their new makeshift settlement Patience Camp, a name he chose deliberately, knowing that naming things gives men the illusion of control. "It's temporary," Wilde said, studying the horizon. "Everything here is temporary," Shackleton replied. Men begin to break, some physically, some mentally. Ord Leese muttered complaints about food, about the weather, about his assigned tasks. Clark argued with McIlroy about scientific samples. Blackbarrow, the stowaway turned steward, developed frostbite so severe that several toes turned black. But the worst was Greenstreet, normally cheerful, now reduced to a shadow. Shackleton caught him staring silently at his mittens one night, as if forgetting what they were for. Shackleton sat beside him. "How long since you've eaten?" "A while," Greenstreet said without lifting his eyes. I gave my portion to Vincent." Shackleton didn't scold him. He simply handed Greenstreet his own ration. "Eat," he said. "We need you." The tear that slipped down Greenstreet's cheek froze before it reached his jaw. The sea opens. On April 8, 1916, after months upon months of drifting on a world of crushing ice, the pressure around Patience Camp suddenly eased. The floes thinned. Water surged like black ink between cracks. Worsley took a reading. "We're near open water," he whispered. Shackleton studied the gray, churning sea. It was freedom. It was death. It was the only chance. "We launch the boats," he said. Wilde exhaled. "It's time, then." "Time," Shackleton confirmed. The men moved with a strange mix of dread and relief. They packed the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. 3 boats, 28 lives, one direction. North. Toward Elephant Island. Toward survival. Or toward the end. Part 7. The Launch into the Hungry Sea. On April 9, 1916, the men of the Endurance stood at the edge of the floe, staring at a restless sea that looked more like a living creature than water. It heaved, it snarled, it slapped chunks of ice together like bones in a giant's hand. Shackleton gave the order, "Get the boats to the edge." The 3 lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, were hauled across the groaning floe. Men strained at the ropes, boots slipping, shoulders burning, until all 3 vessels reached the ragged blue lip of open water. Crean spat into the wind. "Looks like hell out there." "It is hell, but at least it's our hell now," Wilde said. The boats were lowered. Shackleton went last as always, stepping into the James Caird only after every other man had boarded his own craft. "Cast off!" he shouted. The ropes were released. The sea grabbed the boats instantly, and the fight began. A world without up or down. Within minutes, the lifeboats were tossed like corks. Walls of water rose higher than houses, smashing over the bows, drenching the men in freezing brine that stung like acid. The men bailed water relentlessly. Vincent, nearly delirious, screamed at the waves, "They're laughing at us! The damn sea is laughing!" "Bail, Vincent! Save your breath!" Shackleton shouted. The storm did not allow pauses nor pity. The ocean treated the men not like adversaries, but like insects. Spray froze on beards. Oars snapped. Men were thrown sideways into one another as the boats pitched violently into troughs so deep they felt like pits in the earth. Through it all, Worsley kept his eyes on the sky whenever he could, seizing a second here, a half-second there, to take imperfect, desperate navigational readings. He muttered numbers under his breath like a priest chanting ritual verses. Worsley knew what Worsley knew. One bad calculation, and all 28 men would vanish into the endless Southern Ocean without leaving so much as a scrap of canvas behind. The hunt for land. For 7 days they rowed and drifted and rowed again. Their clothes never dried, their lips cracked and bled, their hands froze to the oars, each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. And all the while, the continent they had once feared crushing them, Antarctica, receded behind them like a cruel memory. "Land is close," Worsley said on the 8th day, though he could not see it. He could only feel it in the numbers, in the wind, in the taste of the air. "We're in God's hands now," Crean murmured. "Not God's, Worsley's." The men laughed to spite themselves. Then, on April 14th, Lewis Blackborough, the frost-bitten stowaway who had hidden on the Endurance months earlier, lifted his head from the bow of the Stancomb Wills and whispered a word. "Land." At first the others didn't hear. He repeated louder, pointing with a shaking hand. "Land!" Heads whipped toward the horizon. There it was, a low black slash in the gray. Elephant Island. Salvation in the shape of a rock. The men cheered with voices that cracked from cold, hunger, and disbelief. Shackleton bowed his head. They were not safe, but they were close. The island that tried to kill them. As the lifeboats neared Elephant Island, they quickly realized the cruel truth. No landing place existed. Steep cliffs rose like walls. Glacier spilled straight into the sea. Wave after wave slammed against the rock with the fury of a battering ram. "We can't land here," Wilde shouted over the surf. "We don't have a choice," Shackleton replied. "Hold steady." For 2 hours they searched for an inlet, any inlet, while icy spray blasted their faces. A gust of wind nearly capsized the Dudley Docker. The Stancomb Wills vanished behind a wave so tall, Crean thought it had gone under for good. Then, suddenly, Worsley pointed. "There! A beach!" It was small. It was narrow. It was surrounded by cliffs. But it was land. Shackleton ordered them forward. The first wave hurled the James Caird toward the beach. The second wave newly dragged it back out into the ocean. The third finally threw it onto the stones with a grinding crunch. Men leapt out, pulling the boat further up the beach before the surf could reclaim it. One by one, the other boats arrived. When the final vessel scraped onto shore, Shackleton helped the last man out and turned to face the beach. His boots touched solid earth for the first time in nearly 500 days. The men of the Endurance collapsed around him, laughing, crying, kissing the stones. They had survived the ice. They had survived the sea. But the biggest challenge still lay ahead. Blackborough's sacrifice. The landing had come at a cost. Blackborough, whose frostbite had worsened, was carried ashore with black, dead toes. McIlroy, the surgeon, examined him. "He'll lose the foot if I don't operate, maybe even the leg." "We can't lose him," Shackleton replied. "Do what you must." The men held Blackborough down while McIlroy and Macklin performed the amputation inside a makeshift tent using a blubber stove for heat and a tin saw sterilized in boiling seawater. There was no anesthesia. Blackborough never screamed, but his tears on his cheeks froze solid. Afterward, Shackleton knelt beside him. "You're going home," he said gently. "That's a promise." Blackborough tried to smile, but couldn't. His face was too cold. Shackleton placed a hand on his shoulder. The responsibility pressed on him like the weight of the entire island. Shackleton faces the unthinkable. They could not survive here long. Elephant Island offered no shelter, no rescue, and no hope. No ship had passed this way in half a century. No one even knew where they were. If they stayed, they would die. Shackleton called a meeting. "We cannot remain here," he said. "We must reach South Georgia, 1,200 miles." The men stared at him. 1,200 miles. In an open boat? Across the most violent sea on earth? Worsley spoke softly. "It's possible. Barely, but possible." Shackleton nodded. "I will go with 5 men. The rest will remain here under Wild's command." Wild straightened. "I'll keep them alive, boss." "I know you will." Shackleton looked at each man in turn. "I have your word," he said. "You will come back for you." Not a single man doubted him. Not one. Rebuilding the James Caird. They hauled the James Caird onto the beach and immediately began transforming it into a vessel capable of surviving the open ocean. Hurley and Wild reinforced the keel with wood torn from the other boats. McNeish hammered nails scavenged from the wreckage of their gear into the ribs of the hull. Green melted seal fat to waterproof the seams. They raised the sides, strengthened the mast, built a canvas deck, packed sacks of rock into the bottom for ballast. The wind never stopped, the snow never stopped, but the work did not stop either. Shackleton's chosen crew: Frank Worsley, navigator; Tom Crean, the indestructible Irishman; Tim McCarthy, experienced seaman; Harry McNeish, master carpenter; John Vincent, strong but faltering. 6 men, 1 boat, 1 impossible mission. When the James Caird was finally ready, Wild stood beside Shackleton at the waterline. "If you don't come back," Wild said quietly, "I'll take the men to sea and try to reach Deception Island." Shackleton shook his head. "You won't need to." Wild's voice cracked. "Godspeed, boss." Shackleton's jaw tightened. "Keep them alive." On April 24th, 1916, the James Caird slid into the surf. Shackleton climbed aboard. He did not look back. If he did, he might not have been able to leave. Continue. Part 8. Into the Roaring Forties. The moment the James Caird cleared the surf of Elephant Island, the Southern Ocean greeted her with a blow that nearly rolled her onto her side. McCarthy swore and tightened his grip on the oar. Crean leaned into the wind, face set, eyes burning with determination. Shackleton's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold her steady! Worsley, your bearings!" Worsley's sextant was already in his numb hands. A wave hit so hard it knocked him backward. He spat salt water, wiped frost from his face, and lifted the instrument again. "I can't get a sight," he shouted. "Try," Shackleton said simply. Because if Worsley failed, they all failed. The James Caird creaked and groaned as the waves lifted her, spun her, and hurled her into troughs like a toy. Spray froze instantly wherever it landed, turning ropes into iron rods and canvas into brittle stone. McNeish crawled along the deck, hammering ice off the lines with a small axe so the boat wouldn't freeze solid. Vincent, the strongest man on the expedition, was already faltering. Exposure and frostbite had taken more from him than he admitted. Shackleton noticed. "Vincent," he said, "stay low. Keep your hands moving." Vincent nodded weakly, but the truth was already clear. He would not last long. The first night. Night fell like a smothering blanket of black wool. No moon, no stars, no horizon. Only the sound of the ocean, endless, monstrous, alive. The men huddled beneath the canvas decking, bodies pressed together, clothes wet, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Every few minutes the boat slammed into a wave with a crack that reverberated through their bones. "Is this normal?" McCarthy whispered. Crean laughed. "Normal? This sea ate normal for lunch." Even Shackleton allowed a small smile. But the smile faded when he noticed the ice. A thick layer already coated the mast, the rigging, the gunwales. If enough ice accumulated, the card would capsize. "Up!" Shackleton ordered. "All hands!" The men crawled out into the screaming night, clinging to the slippery deck while waves smashed over them. They hammered at the ice with axes, boots, bare fists, whatever worked. For one terrifying moment, Vincent slipped, sliding toward the edge. Crean lunged, grabbing the back of his coat just as another wave crashed across the deck. "Stay with us, lad. You don't dare quit on me." Vincent nodded weakly. They worked for hours until their arms barely responded to commands. By dawn, the card was lighter, but the men were nearly broken. And this was only day one. Worsley's miracle. The morning sky glowed with a faint, sickly light. Worsley climbed onto the deck, gripping his sextant with hands that trembled uncontrollably. Shackleton steadied him. "You can do this." Worsley nodded, lips blue, teeth clenched. A wave nearly tore the instrument from his grip, but he held on. He lifted the sextant. 1, 2, 3 seconds of sun. That was all, but it was enough. Later, inside the cramped shelter, he scratched figures into his notebook. Shackleton waited. "Well?" he finally asked. Worsley looked up, eyes shining with exhausted pride. "We're on course." A wave battered the hull. A gust of wind rattled the canvas. Ice cracked around the seams. But for the first time in days, hope flickered. Worsley had done the impossible. The gale of the century. On the fourth day, the wind shifted. The sky goes black. A wall of cloud rose from the west like an approaching continent. Crean stared at it. "Oh, Mary, Mother of God!" McCarthy crossed himself. It was a hurricane. The James Caird vanished into a world of screaming wind and towering water. Waves rose 40 feet, 50, sometimes more. They didn't break, they simply swallow. The boat would climb impossibly high, perched on a trembling ridge of water, then drop like a falling elevator. Each crash felt like hitting concrete. Shackleton shouted over the storm, "Bail! Keep her afloat!" McCarthy and Crean bailed with ferocious speed. McNeish braced the mast with ropes that snapped and cut into his hands. Vincent collapsed in the bottom of the boat, shaking violently from cold. Worsley tied himself to Shackleton so the two men wouldn't be separated if the boat flipped. Then the worst wave came. A black wall, higher than anything yet. It rose directly in front of them, blotting out the sky, the horizon, everything. Even Shackleton froze. "It's gonna break on us," Worsley whispered. Shackleton gripped the gunwale. "Hold fast." The waves struck. The boat climbed, 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 and stopped at the crest for a single impossible second. "Pull!" Shackleton roared. Crean and McCarthy heaved their oars. The James Caird slid down the far side, straight, true, like a sleigh on a mountainside. They had survived, but barely. The unspoken fear. On the 7th day, Vincent lost consciousness. McNeish's fingers turned black. Crean coughed blood into his scarf. Worsley's eyes were sunken and red. McCarthy rode with hands cracked open like old leather. And Shackleton? Shackleton felt fear for the first time. He hid it well, but it gnawed at him. If this boat failed, if Worsley's next reading was impossible, if they drifted too far south, the others would die on Elephant Island waiting for his return. He could not let that happen. He would not
Let that happen. The first sight of hope. On May 8th, 14 days after leaving Elephant Island, Crean shouted from the bow, "Land! Land ho!" Shackleton pushed past him, climbing onto the ice-rimmed deck. There it was, a jagged silhouette, mountains rising from the sea, dark cliffs, white peaks. South Georgia. Shackleton exhaled. "Thank God." Worsley leaned beside him. "Boss, I didn't think we'd see her again." Shackleton's voice was soft. "We're not safe yet." Because South Georgia's coast was a fortress of violent surf and sheer cliffs. They had reached the island, but they had not yet beaten it. The battle for the shore. The storm hit again as they attempted to land. Waves hurled the card backward. Rocks tore at her hull. The wind screamed so hard it flattened the surf into white mist. "We can't land here," Worsley yelled. "Then we find another place," Shackleton commanded. For 36 hours they circled the coastline searching for an inlet. Their strength was nearly gone. Their clothes were rags. Their hands were claws. Finally, miraculously, they found a small bay. The James Caird rode the final wave. Shackleton leapt out, rope in hand, boots filling with water as he braced against the pull of the surf. "Push! Push her forward!" Crean and McCarthy shoved with the last of their strength. The James Caird slid onto gravel. They had made it. They were alive. On the black sands of South Georgia, Shackleton fell to his knees. They had crossed the most dangerous sea on earth in a lifeboat. But the mission was not over. They still had to cross the unmapped mountains of South Georgia, on foot, in winter, with no climbing gear, to reach the whaling station at Stromness, and then Shackleton would turn back, because 22 men were still waiting on Elephant Island.
Continue. Part 9. The Land That Felt Like a Miracle. The beach at King Haakon Bay was a barren crescent of black stones, framed by cliffs that speared upward into clouds dripping with ice. The wind screamed through the pass like a freight train. Snow swirled across the ground in white ghosts. But to Shackleton and his men, it was paradise. They had reached land. The James C. Caird lay on her side, ribs exposed, wood splintered, canvas flayed like some dying sea creature that had given its last strength to deliver the 6 men to safety. Shackleton rested a hand on the boat's battered hull. "You've earned your place in history," he whispered. Behind him, Crean and McCarthy were dragging Vincent up the beach. His condition had gone from bad to dire. His lips were blue. His eyes barely opened when the wind touched his face. "He needs shelter," Crean said. "No," Shackleton replied. "We all do." They turned their attention inland. There was no vegetation, no flat ground, no shelter. Nothing but rock, snow, and the roar of the sea. But they were alive, and that was enough. A night of agony. They pitched a ragged tent made from the Caird's canvas, held in place by piles of rocks. The wind beat against it like a living creature trying to claw its way inside. Inside, the men lay shoulder to shoulder. McNeish groaned. His feet were swollen, blistered, turning purple. Vincent trembled uncontrollably. Worsley rubbed his wrists, still bruised from being tied to Shackleton during the storm. McCarthy stared at the canvas ceiling with hollow eyes. Crean hummed a low rhythm, a habit of his when the world threatened to crush him. Shackleton lay still, listening to the storm. He thought of the men on Elephant Island, 22 souls, waiting, rationing, freezing, hoping. His mission was only halfway finished. He could not let the ice take them. He would not. Assessing the impossible. In the gray dawn, Shackleton and Worsley climbed a ridge behind the tent. When they reached the top, the view punched the breath from their lungs. South Georgia was a fortress, a spine of mountains covered in glaciers, sharp ridges of blue ice, crevices that yawned like bottomless mouths, storms swirling across the peaks. Worsley swallowed hard. "Boss, the whaling stations are on the other side." Shackleton didn't speak. "We can't sail around," Worsley said. "The card will sink before we leave the bay." Still, Shackleton didn't speak. Finally, Worsley whispered the truth. "We must cross the mountains. Uncharted, unmapped, unclimbed, and winter was coming fast. No one alive had crossed those peaks before, but the alternative was death." Choosing the final team. That night, Shackleton gathered the crew around the stove made of flattened tin. He said, "Only 3 of us will go." McNeish looked up sharply. "We can all go." "You can't," Shackleton said gently. His feet were frostbitten. Vincent could barely sit up. McCarthy had burned himself on the blubber stove. Worsley was crucial, but exhausted. Crean was ready. Shackleton pointed. Shackleton, Worsley, Crean, the rescue party. McCarthy spoke first. "Boss, if something happens—" "Nothing will happen," Shackleton said. Crean nodded. "We'll walk out of there, lads. You'll see." Shackleton turned to McNeish and McCarthy. "Take care of the others. Keep the camp safe. When we return, we go for the men on Elephant Island." Vincent raised a trembling hand. "Boss, promise you'll come back." Shackleton squeezed his shoulder. "You have my word." And Shackleton's word was iron. Preparing for the ascent. They tore the last usable wood from the card to fashion crude crutches for Vincent and a rough shelter for the remaining men. The cold bit deeper each hour. Shackleton prepared for the journey by making a final modification. He cut the screws from the carpenter's toolbox and drove them into the soles of their boots as makeshift crampons. Their gear: a length of rope, a small axe, a stove, 3 days of food, 2 compasses, a map that showed only the coastline. Everything else was courage and desperation. Before sleep, Shackleton checked each man quietly. He touched Crean's shoulder, looked at Worsley's frostbitten fingers, checked his own boots for holes. He wrote one line in his diary: "We prepare for the greatest effort, and I pray for endurance." The crossing begins. On May 19, 1916, at 3:30 a.m., when the wind was lowest and the snow crust was hardest, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean stepped into the darkness and began climbing toward the mountains. They did not look back, because if they did, they might lose their nerve. Behind them, McNeish watched from the tent flap, whispering a prayer in the wind. Ahead of them rose mountains tall enough to scrape the underbelly of heaven. The ascent into the unknown. Their first challenge was a glacier tilted at a terrifying angle. The wind shoved them sideways. Ice splintered under their feet. They crawled on hands and knees, boots scraping, screws biting into the frozen slope. Halfway up, Crean slipped. Shackleton lunged and caught him, slamming his axe into the ice to anchor them. Snow blasted across their faces in sheets. "Are you all right, Tom?" Shackleton gasped. Crean spat snow. Never better! By dawn they reached the top of the first ridge. What they saw on the other side broke their hearts. More mountains, higher, steeper, colder. Worsley whispered, "It's endless." Shackleton stared. "We go on." The snow mountain of the dead. As they descended into the next valley, fog swallowed them whole. Visibility dropped a few feet. The glacier beneath them cracked ominously. Crean tested the ground with his axe. "Feels thin." A fracture line shot across the ice like a lightning bolt. "Run!" Shackleton shouted. They sprinted, boots slipping, lungs burning. Behind them, the glacier collapsed into a sea of grinding ice, swallowing the valley in thunder. They didn't stop running until they reached solid rock. Panting, shaking, alive. "Boss," Worsley said, "that glacier would have taken us." Shackleton nodded. But it didn't. The desperate slide. Hours later, after climbing yet another ridge, the three men stopped. "Listen," Shackleton whispered. They heard it faintly, a distant sound, carried on the wind. A whistle. A steam whistle. Worsley's eyes widened. "It's the station, Stromness." Crean gripped Shackleton's arm. "We're close, boss." Shackleton stared at the sky. They had crossed the uncrossable. But the final descent was steep, icy, and deadly. They could fall. They could break an ankle. They could freeze. Shackleton looked at his men. "We finish this," he said. Together, they began the final climb toward salvation.
Part 6. The Edge of the Event. Chapter 43. The 22nd page, 1941. For 2 days, the Boulder Mountain facility remained under a silent lockdown. No broadcasts, no exits, no explanations. Only one whisper moved from lab to lab. "The 22nd page has been found." Carter carried it into the conference room himself, placed it on the table, and removed the thin sheet from its protective envelope. No one breathed. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter. On the page was not an equation, not a diagram, not a correction to the oscillation engine, but a date. A single date written in Morozov's fevered, slanted handwriting. August 9th, 1941, 0914 UTC. Below it, a second line. Boundary saturation threshold. And beneath that, one final sentence underscored so violently the paper nearly tore. "Turn it off before this moment, or you won't be able to." Dr. Helena Voss spoke first. "Turn what off?" Carter exhaled slowly. "The Antarctic apparatus." Grant shook his head. "But we already shut that down. The U.S. team reached it. They disabled the field coils. They even imploded the auxiliary cabling." Carter's voice was grim. "You can shut down machinery, but Morozov wasn't referring to machinery." Silence. Then a quiet realization washed through the room. He was talking about the rift, the one that had trembled open in the ice during the Qing expedition, the one that had never fully closed and was still glowing beneath 1,000 miles of frozen earth. Chapter 44. The Rift That Would Not Die. The U.S. Naval Survey Team stationed at the South Orkney Relay Base was the closest friendly unit to the Antarctic interior. When Carter deployed emergency orders, they radioed back within minutes. "We can send a sledge team inland, but we can't get anywhere near the Morozov site without air support." Carter authorized immediate flight. A twin-engine Lockheed Hudson bomber was rerouted from a convoy patrol, outfitted with cold-weather gear, and loaded with the only team in the American military specifically trained for what the classified manuals called Phase Irregularity Field Response. An unofficial name circulated among lower-ranking soldiers, the Thin Places Squad. Led by Lieutenant Arthur Briggs, a lean, weather-beaten officer who had once commanded deep Arctic rescue units, the team launched into the blinding polar night. The Hudson's engines roared across the vast, indifferent darkness. Briggs spoke into the encrypted channel. "Washington, we'll reach the coordinates in 6 hours. Weather is deteriorating. I can't guarantee visibility." Carter replied from Boulder Mountain, "You won't need visibility. You'll know the site when you see it." Briggs frowned. "How?" Carter's voice was low. "Because the sky will be wrong." Chapter 45, The Sky That Bent. At 0341 UTC, the Hudson broke through a wall of swirling black snow and entered a clearing of unnatural calm. Not natural clear sky, clear shape. The clouds above the aircraft had twisted into a spiral, not rotating, not moving, just frozen in an impossible geometry. Private Ellison whispered, "That's the symbol, the one they found in Morozov's notebook." Briggs answered without turning, "That's no symbol, that's a warning." Below them, the ground glowed faintly. The ice was cracking in concentric rings, perfectly circular fractures radiating outward from a single point. The cockpit filled with a distant humming, like a tuning fork struck against the bones of the world. Then the radio sparked. "Briggs, you must not go near the central line." The voice was faint, distorted by distance and interference. Briggs leaned toward the receiver. "Command, repeat your last transmission." Static. Then, "Not command. Listen, you must not." Ellison stared at the frequency dial. "Sir, that's not coming from Washington." Briggs's face tightened. "Then who?" The voice crackled through again, louder now, urgent, cracking with desperation. "Arthur, do not approach the threshold. It's feeding." Briggs froze. He knew that voice. Everyone on the team did. They'd heard it in briefings, in archival recordings, in every training session on the oscillation threat. It was the voice of Alexander Morozov. Chapter 46, The Man Who Should Be Dead. Briggs slammed the radio switch. "Morozov, where are you transmitting from? Identify your location." Static roared back. Then, "Not location, not time. Threshold doesn't care about either." Then a second voice emerged, layered over Morozov's like an echo delayed by milliseconds. It was also Morozov. "Turn it off, before saturation, before 0914. Briggs swallowed. "How are you broadcasting? You died in 1938. A long silence. Then, "Not dead, not alive either. I am where the boundary folds." Ellison whispered shakily, "Sir, this is impossible." Briggs stared out the windshield at the glowing ice and the spiraling sky. "No," he said quietly, "it's exactly what Carter warned us about." Morozov spoke again, this time with raw terror tearing through every syllable. "Do not let it touch you." And then the radio went dead. Chapter 47, Into the Spiral. Briggs made his decision in 3 seconds. "Prepare for parachute drop. We're going down to the site." Private Ellison protested. "Sir, Morozov said not to approach the central zone." "That wasn't an order. That was a death certificate. But someone has to shut this thing down." He strapped on his harness. "Briefing protocol. If we see distortion, we don't interact. If we see movement with no source, we avert eyes. If we hear voices, we do not answer," the team recited in unison. The Hudson descended into the glowing clearing. As they jumped from the aircraft, Briggs felt the world bend, not physically, not visibly, but in his inner ear, as if gravity was slightly out of alignment. The air tasted metallic, the sky pulsed, and in the center of the icy plain stood something no one expected, a structure, tall, angular, wrong, like a tower built not of stone or metal, but of reality itself, folded into new shapes. It hummed with the vibration Morozov had warned them about. Ellison whispered, "Sir, this thing wasn't here during the Qing expedition." Briggs nodded grimly. "It appeared because something on the other side wants it here." They approached carefully, but the closer they came to the tower, the more the world distorted. Snow fell sideways, sound arrived seconds late, shadows pointed toward the light instead of away from it. At the base of the tower, they found a frozen handprint melted 6 inches into the ice. Human, fresh. Ellison's voice shook. "Someone else is here." Briggs already knew who. Morozov, or whatever was left of him. Chapter 48. The Pulse. At 0712 UTC, 2 hours before the predicted boundary saturation, the tower emitted a deep, resonant pulse. Not sound, something deeper. Something that squeezed the heart and lungs and made vision tremble like a disturbed reflection on water. Ellison collapsed to his knees, gasping. Briggs shouted, "Ease down! Do not look directly at the tower!" But Ellison did, and for a fraction of a second, just one, he saw something reflected in its surface. A face. His own, except older, scarred, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. Briggs dragged him back and slapped him across the face. "Private, stay with me!" Ellison's voice cracked. "Sir, that tower showed me my own death." Briggs forced him to stand. "No, it didn't. It showed you what it needs you to believe." But inside, he wasn't sure. Chapter 49. The door begins to open. The ground beneath the tower split, forming a widening crack that pulsed with white-blue light. A low whisper filled the air, rising, falling, indistinguishable from wind until words formed inside it, not heard with ears, heard in the mind. "Let us through." Briggs raised his rifle, even though he knew it would be useless. "Ellison, get the shutdown charges set." Ellison shook violently but obeyed. He knelt and opened the
equipment pack, only to freeze in horror. "Sir?" Briggs looked. Inside the pack, the charges were gone. In their place was a notebook. Morozov's notebook. Burned. Frozen. Impossible. A fresh line had been added to the last page. A line written as they stood there, ink still glistening. "You cannot close what never fully opened." Ellison whispered, "Sir, what does that mean?" Briggs answered without looking away from the tower. "It means we're too late." Part 6. Final chapter. Chapter 50. The moment before saturation. The ice stopped trembling. The wind stopped. Even the swirling spiral in the sky froze in place, as if the entire atmosphere were caught in a photograph. Briggs felt the pressure in his skull vanish all at once. Ellison whispered, "Is it over?" Briggs didn't answer, because the tower, the impossible structure of bent space, the one humming with the vibration Morozov feared, had gone silent. Not inactive, not dormant. Silent like a predator deciding whether to strike. Briggs stepped forward cautiously. He raised his gloved hand and touched the frozen air just inches from the surface. His breath stopped. There was a second hand, mirroring his, not attached to anything, not casting any shadow, simply there, following his movements. A perfect copy. Briggs recoiled, and the tower breathed, a slow, enormous inhalation, as if the structure itself were alive. Ellison screamed, "Sir, look!" Light began gathering at the base of the tower, forming a vertical seam, thin as a thread, bright as a welding arc. A door. A door opening. The hum returned, higher, sharper, urgent. Carter's voice crackled through the radio at that exact moment. "Briggs, whatever happens, do not let anything cross that threshold." Briggs stared into the widening seam of white-blue light. Something moved behind it. Not a figure, not human, a shape that shifted every time the eye tried to focus. Ellison dropped his rifle. "Sir, please, we can't stay here." Briggs swallowed hard. He didn't need Morozov's equations to understand what was happening. This was the moment. The one Morozov warned about. The one written on the 22nd page. August 9th, 1941. 0914 UTC. Boundary saturation threshold. The air split open. A second pulse, strong enough to shake the soul, hit them. Then, a voice, not spoken, but projected, filled the clearing. Deep, ancient, impossible. "Something has called us." Briggs staggered back. He shouted into the radio, "Carter, the door is opening, we can't stop." The light swallowed half his vision. Ellison screamed. The tower shook as reality buckled at its seams. And then, just as the threshold widened enough for something to cross, everything went black. No sound, no wind, no tower, only darkness, and the echo of Morozov's last written words. "Turn it off before this moment, or you won't be able to."